Hi, my name is Kaylin Karpenko, and this is my book review on The Book of Learning and Forgetting by Frank Smith. We'll start off with a brief summary of Smith's book. First of all, he suggests that there are two views of learning, the classic view and official theory. The classic view suggests that learning is effortless and that we as humans are constantly learning, and that this is the type of learning that children do not forget. However, the official theory suggests that learning is very difficult and requires a lot of effort, and unfortunately this is the type of learning that we are seeing in our public schools today. In their early lives, however, children begin learning through the classic view, and a great example of that is language. Throughout the book, Smith suggests that we learn from the company we keep, and this is true with language. For young children, the company that they keep, whether it be their parents or young peers, that is how they learn their language. Smith also suggests that we must be members of clubs in order to learn, and what he means by that is if you're a member of a club, you feel a sense of belonging and you're surrounded by others who love that topic and you can learn from them. Whether it be a music club or an art club, Smith suggests that club membership is crucial, and that this is actually the secret to getting kids to be readers. They must feel as if they're part of the reading club. In school, oftentimes children are exposed to drills and practices that just do not make sense to them, and this causes them to learn not what we want them to learn, but rather that reading, math, science, or social studies are just beyond their reach and that they're just not ready to learn that topic. Smith also discusses short-term and long-term memory quite often. He notes that short-term memory is directly accessible, however it is quickly forgotten, and long-term memory is not forgotten. However, to retrieve information there must be a search or essentially digging for information to retrieve that from the long-term memory. Also, Smith mentions the entrance of the official theory into education and discusses the testing, even the things that we see still today in our public school system. And he concludes that education is in a state of disaster. So the classic view and the official theory, here are just a few main points distinguishing these theories. The classic view is concerned with growth, while the official theory is more concerned with memorization rather than experiences or growth. The classic view is effortless and inconspicuous, while the official theory states we can learn anything at any time if we exercise sufficient discipline and employ the appropriate study methods. The classic view is associated with long-term memory, while the official view is associated with short-term memory. And the classic view suggests that learning takes place when there is confidence, interest, and comprehension, and that we learn from the company we keep. Learning is a social activity, and finally that we don't need a test to discover if someone is learning a particular thing. Their emotions and their reactions usually tell us that in itself. Other notes about the official theory is that it was deliberately invented. Smith suggests that when the official theory is utilized in school, what we're doing is creating totally standardized, predictable, and reliable products. And he also mentions that separating students by ability and inability makes it impossible for students to learn from one another. Also, this theory goes hand in hand with exhaustive testing. In fact, one cannot exist without the other. So my 5 major takeaways from the book. The first one is an example that Smith gives early on about a friend who loves sports and loves it so much that he watches it all the time and is able to talk to him about all things sports. And Smith suggests that if he were to require this friend to start taking frequent tests on his knowledge, force extensive note-taking, share his scores with friends for encouragement, provide feedback for him, and even throw in a dependent factor, such as his pension will depend on how well he does in the test. He questions what would happen. Well, of course, that friend would learn to no longer love sports. It would take away the love that he has now that he has all of these things inhibiting him from enjoying that. Secondly, the discussion on confidence was really eye-opening. He suggests that you're never going to learn if you're not confident in your learning ability. And those who aren't confident in their learning ability suffer from anxiety, and that induces wrong approaches to learning, which causes the confusion with learning for a lot of students. The next three takeaways I thought were especially interesting. The first one that I've mentioned on this page is the militaristic thinking in education. I had never thought about this topic before, and Smith really went into detail about the history of the military roots in education, and he brought out some language such as recruitment of teachers, promotion to higher grades, word attack skills, attainment targets, and of course those are vocabulary terms that we hear quite often today in education, and they derive from the military. The next one is the entrance of testing has wreaked havoc in the classroom. The testing, of course, as I said, exists with the official theory of learning, and Smith notes people stopped talking about students' abilities and interests and started talking about their scores. That's when that score, that number, became the deciding factor for a lot of things in our students' lives. And lastly, the discussion about structure was really interesting. I think someone questioned Smith about, don't children need structure in the classroom? And he argues that children need structure in their own minds. They need to understand something before they can learn it. It has to make sense to them in their world, and it's not going to help them to struggle to memorize something that they don't understand, because inevitably they will forget that information. Here are a few quotes that I thought were especially interesting in the text. The first one suggests or supports rather the classic view. It says, we rarely forget the interests, attitudes, beliefs, and skills that we acquire simply by interacting with the significant people in our lives. The next one talks about the official theory. It says, the official theory that learning requires structure and effort has enormous destructive power. The next one was when Smith was talking about the one-room schoolhouse, about having those students of multiple ability levels and multiple age levels, those who can help and those who can't, the fundamental law of any flourishing community. The next one states, anything that makes sense to us is integrated into our continually growing knowledge of ourselves and our world, and it is never lost. It becomes part of us. And that, of course, links directly to that long-term memory. The next one says, more significantly, people outside the classroom prefer a controlled or structured approach to instruction if they don't trust teachers to teach. And lastly, when psychology's grotesque convictions about learning came into classrooms, out went any possibility that students might learn anything about ethics, respect, loyalty, morality, honesty, charity, collaboration, compassion, or care. I'll discuss some questions that came up for me when I was reading the Book of Learning and Forgetting. First of all, how can teachers teach in a way that reaches students' long-term memories all the time? With the amount of curriculum that we have to teach and the short amount of time, I know that is a difficult task. Next, how can we encourage students to be members of the club, whether it be the reading club or the math club, the science club? This is a great task, considering some students may have learned in preceding years that they are not good in a subject or that they can't be members of a club. And lastly, how do we as teachers and students save ourselves from the infiltration of the official theory of learning that Smith suggests in the story has taken over education? He does mention some ways that we can combat that in our own classrooms. However, I would love to learn more on that topic. So lastly is my recommendation, and I would definitely recommend this book to my classmates because of 3 ideas. First of all, it's very relevant to K-12 education and higher education. It is eye-opening. It explains the history of education and how things came to be, some of those things that we see in education today and may not like. We get to learn the very history of how those things came into place. And lastly, I would recommend this book because I think any educator who reads this is going to benefit and is going to employ some of these strategies that Smith suggests towards the end of the book. And ultimately, I think that will be helpful for students. Thank you.